Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Matt Prame, Eric Scopel on the show as always. Today we're going across the country to Michigan, bringing in Zach Shaw of 24/7 Sports, who covers the Michigan Wolverines for us, the beat writer. Zach, how's it going, man? How's your things back in the Midwest?
Oh, they're good. Thanks for having me on. Obviously, in terms of the football field, as we'll get into, things are different kind of year than the past few years. But I don't know, sun's still shining for me, so I'm good with that.
Yeah, it sounds like weather's going to be better actually in Ann Arbor than it is in Eugene on Saturday. So lucky there for Oregon, I guess, from a perspective there. But let's dive into this game. Won the national championship last year, capped off an impressive run by Jim Harbaugh. He left. Sherrone Moore was his replacement. Faces high expectations, no matter who you follow, but fall at Michigan. But following a guy that won the national championship, I'm sure that heightens it a little bit there. But I think at the same time, probably most realistic fans at Michigan probably said, hey, this might be a year where things maybe aren't as good as it was the year ago. 5-3 start though. How do we view this start to the Sherrone Moore era? Is this online with kind of what was expected? Are they underperforming? Are they? I don't think it is, but are they overperforming? What's kind of the vibe here with Sherrone Moore?
Yeah, I think almost everyone would say underperforming. I think everyone knew this team was going to be lucky to make the college football playoff. They lost 18 starters, 6 assistant coaches, a strength coach who'd been there for 6 years, and of course the head coach. And the 18 starters, I think 14 of them are on NFL rosters this year. So it's hard to fully contextualize just how much they lost. So I mean, even in press conferences, you could tell it was guys who they weren't even like media ready as last year's team. Last year's team, it was a whole bunch of seniors or juniors, and they'd won 3 straight Big Ten titles. That team was ready to go. I mean, they could have hung with everybody in the country week 1. This year's team, as Texas showed, this team had a lot of growth to do. I think the real disappointment from fans is the quarterback position. I'm sure you have a quarterback question ready, but they've already had 3 starters. Pretty much all offseason, those of us who cover the team were kind of like, are they going to add a transfer quarterback? It would really make sense for them to add a transfer quarterback, and then they didn't. And so I actually think the defense, the numbers aren't as good as last year, but I think, they're performing as well as you would expect. The run game's been there for a couple wins, but I would argue even with average quarterback play, they wouldn't be a top 10 team, but they'd be kind of like an Indiana 7-1 right now. Like they would have lost to Texas, but I think they could have won the 2 games they lost, and it'd be a much different outlook on the season. Now Michigan's like trying to scrape together 6-6, and some of that's the tough schedule, but some of that is just, I think, a new coaching staff learned some hard lessons about, hey, just because you like the culture or you like the guys coming up doesn't mean you can be assuming that it's going to be the same kind of production if you haven't seen it in games. So fans are frustrated. I do think beating Michigan State last week and kind of putting yourself in great position to get to 6 wins, that's a whole lot better. I mean, if they'd lost to Michigan State, we'd be having hot seat talk.
Right.
Everything would be on the table at that point. So they got a much needed win. They finally looked kind of like a clean physical team that they were supposed to look like all season. But yeah, I mean, 5-3, I'm sure it's the same at Oregon. That's not sitting well with any fans, I don't think.
Not good enough.
Yeah.
Let's stick with Sherrone for a minute here. I'm just curious on help contextualize this for Oregon fans of this promotion. Was this like a no-brainer, basically? Was this something that it was Jim leaves, we've got Sherrone, he had already been an interim last year for a little bit, this is the guy? Or was there real, I guess, from the fan base and then maybe even from the coaching search, was there a real effort to go find somebody else? Just give us a feel for this and how popular maybe it was at the time when it took place.
Yeah, I mean, it was popular, OC of a national championship winning team. And as you mentioned, he actually stepped in for 4 games last year just due to multiple Jim Harbaugh suspensions. And I think the big ones were, the Penn State game, he was told he was going to be head coach less than 24 hours before the game because the Big Ten delivered a suspension late. And then the Ohio State game, that was obviously, it's always a big game, but when it's 2 undefeated teams and there's been so much controversy, for him to step in. So I think it was it was the natural choice. I think Jim Harbaugh's timing, right? The NFL coaching cycle runs about a month and a half behind the college coaching cycle these days. And so it was like, I think it was like February 2nd. And it's, guys like, I don't know, Kalen DeBoer, Jed Fish. I'm not saying Michigan would have necessarily interviewed those guys, but they weren't really options. And so I think they didn't look at anyone else. Sherrone Moore made a ton of sense. As you guys can imagine, you also are trying to think transfer portal. Like, how do you make sure that you're not losing 20, 30 players just because they aren't sure about the new head coach or whatever. So continuity made sense. They were 40-3 the last 3 years. He'd risen through the ranks, right? When he got there, he was a tight ends coach, coming from a MAC program, and he made it to O-line coach, had a ton of success there, had a year as OC. So I don't know if it's not like a coach in waiting in the sense of like, oh, he's been around for 15 years or anything, but I think maybe similar to Marcus Freeman. I think at Notre Dame, his mix of recruiting, his connection with the players, and then also what he had shown as a position coach kind of had Jim Harbaugh basically on his way out the door. He was like, this is Sherrone's job. If you're interviewing someone else, you're making a mistake. And to be fair, I think, a lot of what he's done has been successful. He hired a pretty good coaching staff. They did eventually get to the transfer portal. Michigan fans would have loved, maybe throw a couple million at a quarterback here or there to get someone. But other than that, I think he represents a lot of what Michigan wants to represent. He's physical. He's energetic. He loves a good offensive line, a good run game. It's just about rounding out the rest of the team, I think would be the next step for him.
You touched on it there, the QB situation. From afar, I think it's been maybe like the most talked about thing from the media scrum here at Oregon the last couple of weeks, whether it was this week as Oregon's playing Michigan or even before that, of just kind of like, how did it get here where they don't have a guy and they've got three? Warren started the first 3 games. Orji has been the starter for 3 games, and then Tuttle got a game, and now Warren's back to being the starter, but Orji's still playing. Just what's gone right, what's gone wrong with this position group? And it sounds like, Warren's going to be the starter, but we probably should expect Orji to be on the field multiple times the rest of the way too.
Yeah, Orji was Michigan's leading rusher against Michigan State, actually. And some of that was the running backs just weren't having a good game. But, he is very athletic. I think he has NFL athleticism at other positions. It's just, right now he wants to be quarterback, which is totally fair. But, yeah, it's been a mess. I think Davis Warren, Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle, if they had entered the transfer portal in the spring, I don't think a Big Ten school would have gone after them. I maybe Northwestern. I mean, it's really been bad. And I think I can't speak for exactly what Michigan was thinking, but like this is a rare scenario where like every media member was like, well, they got to get a quarterback, don't they? And then they didn't. And so swing and a miss, on the coach's part. I think they were, if I'm speaking for them, I think they were hoping that Tuttle would return from injury better. I mean, his injuries have actually gotten so bad he retired yesterday.
Right.
And then, Alex Orji, I think he's one of those guys who, he's got a strong arm, his testing times and stuff. He's like the most athletic player on the team. But I think they were hoping that he would progress a little bit more as a downfield passer. I mean, he threw for, I think, 32 yards against USC, and they won, but also like where does that even, how do you even get there? Because you're right, you're Michigan. You're probably one of the few programs that even if you don't have your NIL ducks totally in an order, or totally in a row, like you can go to the portal and someone's going to enter. Like you can say publicly in a press conference, yeah, we're looking for a quarterback. And I would imagine someone would enter kind of with Michigan in mind.
Hey, I'm interested.
yeah, right. And especially, I mean, JJ McCarthy, they did a great job developing him. He was a top 12 NFL draft pick. And so, it seemed like they could have gotten someone, but it's a little bit of a perfect storm, right? They didn't recruit quarterback super well the 2 years after JJ, and some of that was like no one wants to follow JJ, but some of that was they had some coaching inconsistency there. And then with JJ, he didn't announce he was going pro until 2 days after the transfer portal closed, and Jim Harbaugh obviously didn't announce until the end of January. So if you're a quarterback, like I know Dante Moore was someone that they recruited, and I don't know every detail about that recruitment, but like part of it was, okay, 1, am I going to start? And 2, is the coach that's recruiting me going to be there? And Michigan couldn't really answer either one definitively. So he ended up, going to Oregon. I'm sure Oregon did a good job in recruiting him anyways, but it was kind of one of those things where Michigan, even if they had recruited in December, I don't know if they would have gotten anyone. So some of it's not Michigan's fault. I think everyone would agree, though, they probably should have looked a little harder in the spring or been public about saying, yeah, we could use someone with more experience. Because as you kind of would agree, I mean, if you're a top 12, top 15 program, people want to play quarterback for you. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are, there's probably quarterbacks that are playing Michigan this year that are like, man, I could have been the starter there. So it's a weird scenario. And Michigan, all their success this season, I would argue, comes in spite of their quarterback play.
Well, with that in mind, the uplifting situation with the quarterback position, offense hasn't been a strength for this team. What is reasonable to expect going into this game in terms of what Michigan can produce offensively? Like I'm just looking through it. They haven't scored more than 27 in a Big Ten game. I think Oregon hasn't scored fewer than that in a Big Ten game.
Right.
But I'm just trying to get a sense of is there making sort of an offense that could hang with a team like Oregon, or is it a situation where the quarterback play is so inept that you are really needing the defense to play a perfect game and maybe score some points on its own?
Yeah, it's definitely more the latter. This is a team that needs it to be a fist fight kind of game. Like it needs it to be a 21-17 NFL style game to be successful. I think when defenses have to play Michigan honestly, like they can't sell out to stop the run, I do think they have a good run game. I think Michigan USC was a good example of that, where you saw Kalel Mullings, Donovan Edwards. Those guys are good. I think they could both be on NFL rosters next year. And they've got their offensive line has improved. It's a big physical line. They had to replace their top 6 offensive linemen from last year, so it did take a few games for things to gel. But you're starting to see a little bit more. But also, like Illinois and Washington were 2 really good examples, and Michigan State too. They just stacked the box, and like a good college football team can stop a run first or run only offense like this. So I think the best case scenario for Michigan is Davis Warren continues to progress. Because I actually think against Michigan State, they got crafty with it. They were doing flea flickers, right? They were doing a lot of wildcat quarterback looks. They did a halfback pass for a touchdown, and so they've got a great tight end. And Davis Warren, I think on his best day, he can be effective, but it's going to have to be some sort of methodical, like borderline miraculous game for the offense to score 24 plus points. It's just been even when they win, even when they beat USC, even when they beat Minnesota, or when they beat Michigan State, it's been kind of like the offense just does just barely enough for them to win. So that's why I'm not picking Michigan to win this game, is because I don't think they can move the ball consistently. They don't sustain drives as well as they have in the past, and the run game, even if the run game is effective, most teams can stop a one-dimensional offense these days. So that's the big challenge for Michigan, is to figure out how to, I guess, keep Oregon on their heels as much as possible. And so wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of like a baseball player who doesn't have a fastball. It's like they start throwing the knuckleballs and the sliders and everything. So that's probably Michigan's formula for success, is a bunch of funky, unorthodox pass plays and then trying to run, as much as you can in between the margins.
Maybe it's a quick answer, but is the passing struggles just QB related, or is there a lack of talent at the receiver spots too?
Yeah, receiver is a big problem. I fault Michigan less because they've just thrown the ball so little the past few years, but they lost their top 2 wide receivers, 2 3-year starters at wide receiver, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, and they tried. They at least tried in the spring to land some transfer portal receivers, but with how little they pass, the question marks at the quarterback position, they got a couple guys, but they didn't necessarily get a guy who's going to win them a football game. So receiver has been tough because, I think they've had a tight end lead them in receiving every single game this year, and it's even a game that Colson Loveland missed. It was actually his backup that was their leading receiver, and so wide receiver has been a struggle. I think offensive tackle in pass pro has been a struggle, and I think Michigan State wasn't able to exploit it, but I've watched enough of Oregon to know, like, okay, whoever's at right tackle, especially, I feel like that's a position where they're going to have to play their best game. because pass protection has been a significant downgrade this year than last year. And so it's everything. I think even coaching, I think they're a little predictable at times when they're throwing the ball. I think they follow the same tendencies too much. They broke tendency a little bit more last week and stuff, but yeah, it's I'd say it's mostly like a lot of these problems would be solved with a better quarterback, but it's not unique or solely on the quarterback either.
This is a stat for listeners, not for you, Zach, because I know you know this, but their leading wide receiver has 118 receiving yards 8 weeks into a season. So, and that kind of illustrates some of what you're getting out there. What's going on with Will Johnson? I mean, I think this is a guy who is probably a top 5, top 10 NFL draft pick, one of the best corners in the country. He didn't play last week. What did Sherrone have to say earlier this week about him? And then just broadly, any other injuries we need to be kind of aware of heading in?
Yeah, I think with Will, they are adamantly denying that he's dodging games for the draft or whatever. I can't remember what phrase they used. It was a weird one. But I asked Quentin Johnson, one of the safeties, like, okay, is he still focused, still trying to play? And Sherrone Moore said the same thing. He was out last week, but he, I guess, has been limited in practice. Feels like this is a game he should play though. Like just thinking, like, unless, I don't know, that'd be kind of surprising if he was having coaches and teammates stand up for him to maybe play, and then he ends up shutting it down. So I would consider him questionable. They could really use him though. He's big, he's athletic, he makes plays. He actually has I believe he has more receiving touchdowns in pick sixes than Michigan's wide receivers or any Michigan's best wide receiver. He has 2 pick sixes, and so for a while it was like, okay, that's a better offense than their passing game in some ways. So he's really good. Other injuries, I mean, the offensive line, it feels like they've had to cycle a few guys in and out here and there. I think safety, Brandon Hillman was carted off. He's like a backup safety, but he's a good backup safety. And they've had other guys who've, that safety position in general feels like they've constantly had 2 or 3 guys who are out. Trying to think. Yeah, Andrew Gentry was their right tackle last week. I think I guess questionable. I don't know. I don't know if it's the same in Oregon. They never tell us. Like,
No.
Like even if it's like the guy probably had a season-ending injury, they just like won't admit it. So but yeah, I think offensive line, I think defensive backs are the 2 positions that have been affected most by injury. But outside of Will Johnson, I don't know if there's like a star Michigan player that's out for this game. And if they are, it'd be something that comes up in the next 2 days.
Michigan is just like Oregon. They don't divulge much information unless it's very clear in the game that the guy literally got carted off. That, like, yes, he will be out for a while is basically what we get. Don't see him playing for the foreseeable future. We don't get any done for the year type confirmations, or he'll be back in 3 weeks because he's dealing with ankle. It's just we're keeping an eye out for the well-being of our players. But going away from that, the defense, Michigan. Look, the offense, they have their struggles. They've put the defense in some tough spots, but this is still an elite D. This is still a good defense. They've got talent across the board, a bunch of NFL dudes, a lot of guys that have played the last couple of years on top 5 or last year, the number 1 defense in the country. Just what makes this group who they are? What's kind of, I guess, do Michigan fans appreciate how good they are because of the tough spots that are being put in every single week with a one-dimensional offense? Just what's kind of your thoughts here on this unit?
Yeah, I think fans really appreciate the defensive line. Michigan has been, I would put them on par with Ohio State, Alabama, whoever, in terms of producing NFL edge rushers the past decade or so. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 on the IR right now, but there's still like 5 or 6 that are starting somewhere on NFL teams. So, I think Michigan fans have come to appreciate, it's not usually this bad of an offense, but they've had a lot of teams over the years that are excellent defense, so offense. And so I think the defensive line is excellent. I think all 4 of their starters will be drafted next year. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham are kind of the nationally known names, but Josiah Stewart's having an incredible season, and Derek Moore is too. His is less in sacks and more in like the PFF pressure stats and things. But yeah, you could argue they're the best pass rushing team in the country. I think there have been some struggles though elsewhere. I think the secondary, not just with Will Johnson's injury, but they lost multi-year starter Rod Moore, multi-year starter Mikey Sainer still. They lost another starting cornerback, from last year's team. And so I think tackling has open field, defensive back tackling has been a problem. And I think, I think just hanging with, especially in the slot, I feel like, a team with some good shifty slot receivers, they've had success. They've been able to break off some big plays so I think coverage has been a weakness, coverage and tackling. And, but yeah, the front seven, I mean, they look really good. If the rest of their team was that good, this would be a much different kind of preview. I think there'd be a lot more hype around this game. So they'll test Oregon, right? The pass pro, and they're pretty good at stopping the run for the most part. I think third downs have been a problem. Third and long, weirdly. I think they're actually worse at like giving up 3rd and 10 first downs than 3rd and 2. As strange as that is, but I think 3rd and long penalties have been a problem, but they do seem to have cleaned it up the past couple weeks. Very, so great, excellent pass rush, great run defense. I think everything else is, they're still trying to get better at, because it's hard. I mean, Michigan's offense has 15 turnovers this year. That's a lot of short fields. They have a lot of 3 and outs too. It seems like they have 3 or 4 a game. And so, yeah, they've been put in tough positions. I think fans know that. But also I think, especially that Texas game, I think Wink Martindale, he was known as an aggressive defensive play caller in the NFL. He might've been a little too aggressive in some games this season, but I mean, even the games they've lost, it wasn't until Michigan, I think Washington and Illinois, they had multiple sequences where they turned the ball over twice in like 4 plays in their own territory. And so it's like, yeah, even an elite defense is probably going to give up some points there. So I think it's a good defense overall. I think if the coverage, if Oregon like toasts Michigan, I think it's going to be in coverage. I think it's going to be wide receivers being able to make plays after the catch and shake some tackles.
You kind of answered part of it there, because I was curious on just looking at it from a distance here. Illinois, Michigan State, those are the largest rushing production games for an opposing offense all season for Michigan's defense. Not that this is anything crazy. It's like 165, 185, something like that. Zach, you probably know more accurately than I do. And that just kind of surprised me, given that it was like under 100 yards every game prior to that, basically. Was there something that changed there, or was that just a case of those teams finding something and going towards it? And I guess, is that an area of concern at all going into this one, where Oregon has a couple of running backs that seem to be surging?
Yeah, I think to answer the stat part of the question, they played a weird amount of pass first teams early on. I mean, even, not just Texas and USC and Washington, but even Fresno State and Arkansas State. It seemed like they played a lot of teams that are comfortable throwing it 40 times a game. So the passing stats look terrible from a yards per game standpoint, but per play, they're a little bit better. But yeah, I think they just didn't play a lot of good rushing teams early on. So they do need to grow. I think Michigan State surprised Michigan with how often they ran the ball. Like, I think they were expecting Michigan State to throw it a lot more. I think one sneaky area, I haven't watched quite enough Oregon to know this, but like, I think mobile quarterbacks, I think Michigan loves to like really rush the passer. As I mentioned, their pass rush is good, but sometimes that leaves like 20 yards of open field that, a quarterback who can get out of the pocket is going to be able to make some yardage. And but if a team comes in and says they want to run the ball down Michigan's throats, I do think Michigan has the personnel to switch that up. I think Michigan State, I don't have the exact numbers, but their rushing yards in the first quarter versus the rest of the game, I think they got more than half their rushing yards in the first quarter. And so I think Michigan was a little surprised that the Spartans went out with run first defense. But in run defense, I mean, the same 4 guys up front. And then I think their linebackers, Jayshon Barham and Ernest Hausman, efficient tacklers and pretty good. Not as good as last year, but pretty good at kind of finding the rush lanes and finding out where the guy's going to be. There's some big play potential in the run game, but Michigan tends to win the line of scrimmage in run defense so far this season.
All right, let's have you, Zach, kind of give us the script for what needs to happen for Michigan to win this game. Give us like a couple of things on both sides of the ball that you think are critical if this is going to be an upset.
Yeah, or Oregon needs a flight delayed. I think it's just. I mean, look, this is just one of those matchups where I think Michigan would have loved to have played this game last year,
Yeah,
or even
sure.
in a different year where they had more things ready to go. I think script one. I think Davis Warren needs to kind of pick up where he left off last week. I don't think that's good enough to beat Oregon, but you did see a little bit more downfield passing. I think you saw them go through. I mean, we're talking this is all relative, right? But he's going through like multiple reads and like completing a pass 20 yards downfield. And so, that's stuff that Michigan hasn't had a lot of this season. So I think the key for Michigan offensively is just try to establish that early so that your run game, so you have to be defended honestly. Because when teams can stack the box, this run game is not nearly as good as they are when teams have to defend them straight up. So that's a big part of it, is just trying to find some balance. You probably do need your running backs to bounce back. They've had good seasons, Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards, but last week I think they combined for 45 yards on 21 carries. So that kind of speaks to their struggles, but also how much Michigan State was prepping to stop those two and dare Michigan to do something else. And they kind of did. I mean, they did enough to win, but it's not like they poured on the yards or the points either. Defensively, I think this is a huge game for Jair Hill, Zeke Berry, the other cornerbacks, I guess. We know what Oregon's receivers can do. We know what this passing game can do. And so if you can stick and you can make a couple key tackles in screenplays, or maybe you break up a pass, or maybe you get a pick here and there, I think that allows the defensive front to maybe, win that pass rush, win that run defense, as I mentioned. Penalties are must. They've gotten better at penalties, but that was a huge problem earlier on in the season. And then offensively, just to go back to offense, I mean, they didn't have a turnover last week. I think it was the first time all season they didn't have a turnover. They have 15 in their first 7 games, which is just, I don't know how many teams could possibly win with that many turnovers. So I think it's got to be clean, physical, balanced offense, and then defense. I think there's just a couple individual matchups that Michigan's going to have to show up in, and I think the defensive line, the pass rush, I can say they're one of the best in the country. This is where you show it, right? Either you show it against teams like Oregon, or you're probably not the best pass rush in the country. So I think you do need your best players to look like your best players in matchups like this. But boy, it's tough sledding. I mean, this is one of the first times that even a home game where I'm like, I don't know if Michigan's got a path here, unless Oregon itself kind of messes things up here and there.
Sure. Last one for you is just kind of what's the vibe of the fan base out there for this game? Like when Ohio State came, it was obviously 2 versus 3 makes it super enticing. But there was a lot of excitement for one of the 2 big brands of the Big Ten to come out west and play in Autzen. It's been a while since Oregon and Michigan have played. They've only played like 5 times. So this isn't like a matchup that has consistently happened every few years in non-con before Oregon joined the Big Ten. And is this being viewed as a big game, or has the season and the way it's gone kind of eliminated some of that excitement?
Yeah, I think it has. I think before the season, this was, I know Michigan fans were kind of circling this as like, I don't care the cost, I want to be at this game. And now it's kind of like, hey, does anyone want to buy my ticket off me? So it's definitely changed, and it happens, if you're 5-3 and Oregon's a double-digit favorite in Ann Arbor, and the last time Michigan was a double-digit underdog at home was 2013. So this is
wow.
This has been a while, and you can actually, I think I tweeted out the stats, but it's been a long time, or it's not very often that Michigan's a double-digit underdog, period. And usually, you look at the years those teams are. Usually, it's years where it's just things don't work out. They're 5-7 or 7-5 or something like that. So it's Michigan's going to take their shot. I mean, right? I think the one saving grace for Michigan is they have just enough first round NFL draft talent. They have just enough talent at some key positions where you're kind of like, okay, maybe on a clear day or I guess for Michigan, on a rainy day where everything opposing offenses can't get what they want to get, maybe you can win a slugfest, but it's very tough sledding. For Michigan, I think it's one thing to be young. It's another thing to be young and, maybe deficient at a couple positions, and then they're young, deficient at a couple positions, and they are mistake prone. It's just, I'm sure Michigan in hindsight is really going to be kicking themselves for that Washington loss, because that felt like a winnable game. And now the battle begins, right? They have Oregon this week, they have Indiana next week on the road, and then of course they have at Ohio State at the end of the season. I mean, this is just they could end up playing 4 college football playoff teams, and they already got smoked by 1. So this is a chance. I think Michigan players are kind of rallying around the fact like they can start wrecking some people's seasons, they can start playing spoiler, but also teams that are resigned to playing spoiler on October 29th. Usually they don't play spoiler, so it's gonna be interesting to see what Michigan's got. But yeah, I think Michigan fans are kind of looking at this as like, fingers crossed, maybe they do something. But I think there's acknowledgement that this year's team just is not one of those teams that can win these head-to-head matchups.
He is Zach Shaw. He works for the Michigan Insider, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on the show, man. Really appreciate the insight, and hopefully we get served up a great game.
Yeah. I mean, it's anything can happen on the road with a team traveling across the country, but I think I've made my thoughts on the matchup pretty clear. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, this is cool. I will say this is one of those moments where the Big Ten expansion is really cool. I think I got to go to Seattle. I look forward to going to Oregon in a couple of years. I mean, the cool thing is like these are brands that have a lot of passionate fans, a lot of talented players, and now they're going to face each other more regularly. So I do like that part. I think even if Oregon is expected to win by 15 points or whatever, it's fun to see the 2 logos, the 2 jerseys, and a lot of talented players go up against each other.
Thanks, Zach.